Welcome back to Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Today we're going to look at the book of Ruth, and the theme is loyalty before the king comes. So why are we saying that? Ruth was written during the time of the Judges. You'll go to Ruth 1:1, the very first verse, and notice this common statement. Could be translated differently. It is translated differently in different versions, but chapter 1 verse 1 begins, now it came to pass. That's a translation of one word, vayehi. I've mentioned this before, that this marks a new episode. So you can see how this connects Ruth, even grammatically, with the time of Judges. And it came to pass, the new episode in Judges. But look how the rest of the verse goes. Now it came to pass in the days of when the judges ruled, that there was a famine in the land. There's different opinions on when in the book of Judges, under which judge Ruth lived and displayed in total contrast to the nation of Israel. Some believe she lived in the time of Samson. You just start tracing back, and some bring it to the time of Samson as the judge. If that's the case, then that was a very wicked time. That was near the end of the Judges, and things had progressively gotten worse and worse, spiraling down and down and down. So much so that Samson could not get an army to follow him against the Philistines, because Israel was so satisfied with the way they were living. And to compensate, God gave Samson superhuman strength. But here's Ruth in total contrast to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was disloyal to God, to their families. They were idolatrous. They were immoral. Ruth was the great-grandmother of David the king, and was loyal to God and her family in the days of apostasy. Go to the very end of Ruth. Verse 17 says, and the woman, her neighbors, gave a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. Now, Naomi is the mother-in-law of Ruth. She did not give birth. But when it says son there, you could just substitute the word descendant. There was a descendant born to Naomi through Ruth and Boaz. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. You drop down to the last verse, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. Very last word in Ruth is David. So this was written during the time of David. It's like the book of Judges. When it's looking back, it's looking back to the time of Judges, when there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Well, Ruth was also written during the time of the kings, specifically David. And here's the genealogy, basically, of David, as we will look at a little more. And so here's Ruth, the great-grandmother of David the king, loyal before the king comes. She was loyal before the king came. And Ruth provides this genealogy for David. This is an important link to 1 Samuel. Ruth is really the genealogy to David, the king, who will be anointed in 1 Samuel. So you see Ruth as this incredible transition book. She is in Judges. She is living this godly life in an idolatrous, immoral society. So she links us to Judges, but then she links us to 1 Samuel, where Samuel anoints David to be king. So here's his genealogy, his important genealogy that links him to Judah. If you go to verse 18, now these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez was the son of Judah. Why is that important? Because the Messiah has to come from the tribe of Judah. Genesis 49 predicted and prophesied. So here's this important connection to David, and Jesus was, Matthew 1:1, the son or the descendant of David. Ruth has been compared to Jude. You know, the book of Jude, right before the book of Revelation. Jude describes apostasy and apostates. Right before the book of Revelation, which describes the coming of the King, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And Ruth demonstrates loyalty. So let's go to chapter 1. Here's this word, loyalty. It's never found in our English Bible. But here is the word that we get the idea of loyalty from. The Lord is loyal to his people. Look in chapter 1, verse 8. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, quote, "Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you." So here's the word for loyalty, but you notice that it's translated kindly depending on your translation. Sometimes it's translated mercy, kindness, loving kindness. Why is it translated that way? Because loyalty is demonstrated with kindness, mercy, love. So the Lord is loyal, but Ruth is loyal to her husband. You go to chapter 3, verse 10, see the word again. Chapter 3 and verse 20. That should be verse 20. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, that is to Ruth, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not left off his kindness to the living." So I got ahead of myself right here. It is to 20, chapter 2, verse 20. Again, that's the Lord's loyalty that is being emphasized there. Now we can look here, secondly, that Ruth is loyal to her husband, chapter 3, verse 10. This is Boaz speaking. If you've read the book of Ruth, then Boaz is the Jew who marries this Moabite, Ruth. Look in verse 10. And he said, and Boaz said, "Blessed be you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness," chesed, that's the Hebrew word, or loyalty, in the latter end than in the beginning, inasmuch as you followed not young men, whether poor or rich. Ruth was loyal to her husband, and first of all, she's loyal to her God. If we back up to verse 16, the word loyal is not there, but this commitment, this verbal commitment to not only Naomi, her mother-in-law, but her God is stated right here. Her loyalty is expressed in her commitment. And Ruth said to Naomi, "Entreat me not to leave you or to return from following after you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people." Look at this. "And your God, my God." That is a commitment of loyalty, not only to Naomi, but to Naomi's God. Ruth was a Moabite, and the other daughter-in-law went back to the Moabites and to the Moabite gods. Ruth separated from not only Moab, but Moab's gods, to Naomi and her God, the one true God. So here, this book is about loyalty. And you remember back in Judges, we saw that the theme was we need a godly leader because the tribal leaders failed to defeat the enemy in Canaan, the promised land. The judges failed to stop apostasy. And then the Levites failed to obey the law. We looked at 2 Levites who spearheaded apostasy. The first was religious apostasy, chapters 17 and 18, where we see this disloyalty to God and family. There's this individual Levite who is idolatrous. And he leads an entire tribe to be idolatrous, a Danube tribe. Individual apostasy leads to societal apostasy. Sin is never contained. Man is not an island unto himself. Paul said a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. A little yeast in a lump of dough affects the entire dough. And Paul's using that in 1 Corinthians 5, where he says a little sin in the church will permeate throughout the church. Therefore, it has to be excised. It has to be extracted. There must be church discipline, or the whole church will be affected. Well, this one Levite, who's supposed to be one of the religious leaders, was himself an apostate and led the entire tribe of Dan into idolatry. Then moral apostasy follows religious apostasy. You remember we said moral apostasy piggybacks on religious apostasy. But again, the point is there is disloyalty to God in the family. Here's another individual, another Levite who is immoral. He allows his concubine, his second-rate wife, to be gang raped all night. But this led to societal apostasy. This time it's the tribe of Benjamin who is immoral. The nation of Israel, because they had almost eliminated the tribe of Benjamin, they knew they had to salvage this tribe so they could remain the 12 tribes of Israel. And they gave permission to Benjamin basically to human traffic young girls, young women. And so you see this, the immorality of one spread to the immorality of many. Up here, the idolatry of one contaminated a whole society. But here's the contrast, the stark contrast in Ruth. In Ruth, you have loyalty to God and family in the days of apostasy. So Judges again is the background for the book of Ruth. The tribal leaders failed, the judges failed, the Levites failed. There was religious apostasy, moral apostasy. But in Ruth, you have loyalty to God and family in the days of apostasy. The Lord is loyal to his people. We saw that already in chapter 1, verse 8, and chapter 2, verse 20. Hesed. It's translated mercy, kindness, loving kindness. Loyalty is demonstrated with kindness. Ruth is loyal to her husband. And Ruth is loyal to her God. What an example for us. We're like in the book of Jude, in the days of apostasy, doctrinal apostasy, moral apostasy, and disloyalty to God, disloyalty to family. I heard of a jewelry store in Hollywood that advertised wedding rings for rent. That just sort of demonstrates the judges-like atmosphere society that we live in, trial marriages, cohabitation, a disloyalty to one another, to what the scriptures say we should believe and how we should live. But Ruth stands out as this beautiful example of no matter how corrupt society is around us, we can be pure. We can be characterized by loyalty, mercy, kindness, commitment, and love. And so I want us to continue on with the book of Ruth, and then we'll go through the book chapter by chapter in our next time together.